We got quarterly feedback from supervisors, from every single person, for multiple years. We knew if they were getting retained. We knew if they were getting promoted. All of it was quantified and put into Salesforce. That was the kind of organization that we ran. So we have all this data. So in 2014, the director of recruitment and I are sitting together, and we're having a conversation about a pattern that we had noticed. And we had noticed on these interview weekends, we'd have maybe 40 people that would be on the weekend, and we'd advance some portion of those. And there were always 2 to 3 candidates who did not get advanced, right? 2 to 3. But we thought they should have gotten advanced, right? We knew them. We had seen their resumes. We had interviewed them earlier in the process. We were like, these people are going to make it through the weekend. And they didn't. And those people were consistently candidates of color, Black or Latino primarily. So we're like, that's interesting pattern to notice. So we said, you know what? Let's just do a really rough and dirty analysis. Let's look at the scores of the people that made it through this interview weekend, right? We interviewed a bunch of people. We said, everyone who made it through, we had a hunch. We said, let's look at those scores and let's rank them from highest scores to like good. These are the folks that made it in, right? Let's look at those. Let's just rank them and see who that was. It was in Salesforce, pulled it out, really easy report. What we saw was an uneven distribution of interview scores along lines of race. White candidates scored at the top, and our candidates of color started to score in towards the lower end. These are still candidates who are getting in, right? These are still good, strong candidates, but we saw this pattern. We're like, that's odd. Let's look at the previous weekend. We looked at the previous weekend, same pattern. We said, all right, well, let's look at last year. All the weekends last year, same pattern. Year before that, same pattern. Year before that, same pattern, over and over and over again. Like, that's just not possible. So then we said, you know what? We have a ton of data on work performance. How do folks actually do once they're on the job, right? There, we did the same thing, right? Whether it was 360 or quarterly feedback or promotion rates, we ranked everyone. This is them in the job now for multiple years. We did not see this distribution. There was no distribution along lines of race. Talent was evenly distributed. Once they're in the job, there was no way to break it down this way. So the first thing that you have to notice here is something we talked about earlier in the workshop, right? You just have to recognize interview performance does not equal work performance, right? That's just a flaw of interviewing. You're always trying to get better at it, but that is just how it works. All of us have interviewed someone who interviewed really well, and they just don't do that great. Or they're on the cusp, you're kind of like desperate, you need somebody, they're good enough, you hire them, and they kill it, right? There's a disconnect there. That flaw, though, should not fall along lines of race, right? That is problematic. So we said, okay, we got to figure this out, because this isn't really data analysis. Like, I shouldn't be at a data conference talking about, like, ranking stuff and that. Let's look at the other weekend. Oh, let's look at the other weekend. No. So luckily, we had somebody on our team who had expertise in this. Her name is Dr. Patel. PhD in statistics out of UCLA, taught at UCLA, undergrad in mathematics, did data and evaluation for many years, that person. So we went to Dr. Patel and we said, hey, we got feelings about this, but can you look at the data and just tell us what might be going on here? So she said yes. So she created a research question. What factors, aside from professional experience, which should be all that matters, are affecting our second round interview scores? Right? She had 4 years of data to work with. We had 4 good years of data, about 1,000 people in here, with all that data that I mentioned to you, all the demographics, anonymized, of course, right? But every single score they had on every single stage, that's what she was able to work with. Here's what she found. Controlling for other factors, there were 3 things that affected our scoring at second round interview scores, at interview day. One of them, degree type. MBAs scored higher than JDs or PhDs, consistently. Even if they had the exact same work experience. They had expertise in HR or finance or operations. They had worked the same amount of time, the same industries. MBAs scored higher. Second, years of work experience. Candidates with less years of work experience scored higher than candidates with more years of work experience. Less experience and you do better in our process? That's interesting. And then finally, race. White candidates, holding everything else equal, same resume, same degree type, same years of work experience, same industry, same gender, holding all else equal, white candidates scored higher than Black or Latino candidates. I share the first 2 with you because we knew they were true. We knew we had a preference for MBAs. The organization that I worked in 2014 was filled with consultants, former consultants, people with MBA backgrounds. They had a preference for MBAs. They knew that profile, right? It was never written on the website. It didn't say we prefer MBAs, but hey, JDs and PhDs, go ahead and apply, right? We never even said it to each other, but it was up here. Because it was up here, it showed up in our data. We also knew we had a preference for younger candidates. We had a preference for people with 8 to 10 years of work experience. We never said it out loud. It wasn't on the website. But if somebody applied with 15 or 20 years of work experience, they were the senior VP of HR or global HR, odds were lower. They were like, that's not quite the profile. We're looking for like a director of HR. So we tried to get them in the work through some other program, but not this program. We knew that was true. We never said it out loud. It's ageism. We never said it to each other. It wasn't on the website, but it was up here. We knew what we preferred. Up here, it was showing up in our data. Because we knew those first were true, it made it a lot harder to deny that somehow up here, when we're scoring candidates, we had a preference for white candidates because we knew the other ones were true. So we couldn't say, oh, well, that one's not true. The other ones are true, but no, that one's not true. We had to grapple with it. So that told us, okay, we have to figure this out. Number one, we're missing out on talent because interviews are not correlated to work performance the way they should be. So we got to get better. We're missing out on talent, period. And odds are we're missing out on talent because of race. Right? So we spent the next 4 years understanding how the brain works. Right? How do you make decisions? How do you disrupt bias? How do you make better interviewing experiences? 4 years. And along the way, along those 4 years, Dr. Patel was gathering data at every single stage of the process. Right? And she was feeding back to us, okay, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. Here's where bias continues to pop up, here's where it doesn't pop up at every single stage. And we're figuring it out. We're saying, oh, this works. Oh, that doesn't work. Oh, let's try this. Let's tweak that. 4 years of experimenting on how to make better decisions. And we figured it out. We figured out practices that actually disrupt bias and lead to better outcomes, right? And better decisions about talent. She would give us slide decks with like 40 slides and like another 40 slides of appendices, right? I mean, y'all know how PhDs are. Like, well, how can there be more appendices than slides? But yes, and that's what we learned. Let me share one of those slides with you. I can't share 1,000 with you, but let me share one with you. So these are the 4 years where we're doing nothing about bias, right? We care about diversity, right? We have good processes. We are saying out loud, this is what matters. We did no work about bias, right? 4 years, we won't get into the weeds on that, but this is one of the ways she measured the impact of bias. And then this shows the 4 years after we started working explicitly on bias and learning how to disrupt it. And the impact goes down and down and down. It ends in 2020 because in 2020 that program spun out, that organization spun out, and it now lives at the Yale School of Management. So there's an organization there called the Broad Center at Yale, and they focus on people who work inside of education. It's no longer focused on the private sector. It's focused on people who work in education, and they give free master's degrees. So if you know anyone interested, great program, free Yale degree, master's in educational leadership. So the data ends there. Let me give you an example of what I mean by specific practices, right? And then we talked about this in the workshop. In the workshop, I cover 5 of them, but let me give you one to give you a feel for, like, when I say specific practices, like what you have to do if you're going to try to disrupt bias, right? It's called Park Your First Impression. Every single one of you has a first impression, right? There's no stopping it. We have first impressions. What you want to do is you want to park it. You don't want to eliminate it. You want to park it. What that looks like in the context of interviewing is when the moment you interview, as soon as a candidate comes in the room or as soon as they show up on the screen, if you're doing a virtual interview, you ask yourself this question: will this candidate interview well? Just ask yourself that question. You'll be surprised to find out you have an answer already and you haven't even started interviewing them, right? Maybe it's based on the resume, maybe it's based on something you saw on LinkedIn, or maybe it's what they look like. You've picked up on something, societal bias. You don't know what it is, but you have an opinion. So the way we trained our interviewers was they had an interview packet. They're going to ask their questions. At the bottom of the front page, they had a line, just a line. And it said yes, no, and I don't know. And we trained them at the very beginning of the interview. Within the first minute, just park your first impression. You'll find you're leaning one way or the other already. You haven't even asked a question yet. You're probably like, yeah, I kind of like this person. No. Where you want to be is I don't know. Because, like, why are you interviewing them if you know? Like, but you actually have an opinion. What you're doing is you're parking it. You'll notice it doesn't say, like, eliminate your first impression, destroy your first impression. No, park your first impression because it's a data point. I don't know you. Your first impression might be right. I will never tell anyone that their first impression is wrong because I don't know you. I don't know your context. What I can tell you is you don't know if it's right, but it's influencing you. So park it. Treat it like a data point. Put it down on paper. Get it out of the way. Now do your interview. The idea here is to come back to it during the debrief. You put it aside. It's a data point. Got it. Good. First impression. Captured. Now, during the debrief, you can talk about it. Like, hey, I had this first impression. Did anyone else have this? Or I had this first impression and it went away, or it stuck with me. Now you're assessing it. A lot of our work was based on a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, right? Really good book about how the brain works. And in the book, he talks about system 1 thinking and system 2 thinking. System 1 thinking is really fast, really quick. It's where intuition and first impressions live. It's also dangerous, right? Because that's where discrimination and bias and very quick thoughts based on societal beliefs and racism and any other ism lives. It can make good decisions. It exists for a reason, but you got to be very careful with it. What this practice does is it takes a system 1 thought and moves it to the debrief where you can do system 2 thinking. We can spend a little bit more time with it, reasoning, deliberate. Why am I thinking this? So you're honoring it as a system 1 data point, putting it in system 2 thinking where you spend time with it. Really good practice for disrupting bias. Have a conversation about it. So this is where the story starts to evolve, though. As I'm doing this reading and research about how the brain works and how you make decisions, I came across some research on why diversity leads to better decisions. So I want you to take a minute at your table and just chat with your neighbor and explain why you believe diversity leads to better decisions. What could that connection be? And by the way, if you don't believe that diversity leads to better decisions, just let the other person go first. It's fine. I'm not trying to start an argument. We only got 1 minute. But just, why would diversity lead to better decisions? Just chat for 1 minute. I'll keep us on the clock. Why is there a connection between these two? About 15 more seconds. Five more seconds. Okay. All right. I'm going to pick on this table. Pick on sounds like it's going to be horrible, but in like 1 or 2 sentences, like what did you discuss? Like why do you think diversity leads to better decisions? Just tell me, what did you?
We discussed multiple perspectives, and as we discuss everyone's view of a problem, we come closer to the big T, the truth.
Excellent. That's correct. How many of you, yes, whew, all right, good, we passed. All right, how many of you had a similar answer? Similar, it may not have been exactly the same, but similar, like different perspectives, we got different things to look at the same problem, angles. Go, raise your hands high, let me just see. Okay, go ahead, hands down. Anyone have a different answer? Okay, one, very interesting. What was your thought?
I was saying that if you have a lot of diversity, then your thinking fast will be different in the group, which forces you into thinking slow. But if everyone thinks the same thing the first time, then we believe we have group consensus, and we're like, great, good, we know this, and we can respond.
Bingo. Okay, so this is what's so interesting. And it's so interesting that everyone has the different perspectives. We all know that. That's true. It's not wrong. But the research shows, right, that diverse groups spend more time on the decision. They think about it longer because they have to disagree, find consensus, figure it out, go deeper. Time is the underlying factor. And that's when a light bulb went off for me, like the first small light bulb. Diversity is a forcing mechanism for system 2 thinking. I couldn't have said it better. If everyone's the same, then we go right into system 1 thinking. Very quick decisions, but dangerous, faulty. Good for some things, not good for other things. If you have diversity, you're forced to think a little bit longer. Time. So then other light bulbs started going off for me, and I started thinking about, like, what are the things that we use to make decisions? Data, obviously, technology, legal, right? Stakeholders, diversity, values, technology. The thing that we think about the least or understand the least is time. Like, I've written memos about data and technology. I've never written a memo about time to anyone in my organization. I've written memos about data and stakeholders and diversity. Never, ever thought deeply about time. But time is always ticking. It's always there. It's driving decisions. So the first thing I tried to do to understand, like, okay, what's going on here with this time thing was I came up with questions, right, to force us to think about time when we're making decisions. And I came up with some good ones, right? Like, why are we feeling pressured? Or what's making us feel pressured? What would make us reverse this decision, putting myself into the future, right? If we speed up, who's affected? If we slow down, who's affected? Like time-based questions that really helped us come up with better questions, better decisions. I came up with like 9 of them, and I hit a wall. Couldn't come up with any more. I'm Googling, like, there's got to be more questions. Hit a wall. And what I realized was, like, as people, we experience time, like, in one direction, like, always forward. It's linear. Like, we can think to the past. We can't go to the past. We can think forward. We can't go to it's always like this. And because of that, I couldn't break out of a certain way of thinking about time. It was structured. It was like, okay. But if you start reading about time, time is weird, man. It's slippery. It's like, it's not linear. Like, it stretches, it compresses. Depending on what you're thinking about, it moves way faster. Gravity affects it. I won't get into quantum physics, but like, because I don't understand it. But if I did, I would be able to explain to you. Like, it moves faster at the top of a mountain, slower at the bottom of a mountain. It's weird. It's slippery. It's hard for us to grasp it. But what I gained was, because time was top of mind for me, I started coming across practices that already had time built into them as the way kind of they just operated. And I started noticing, oh, this is a really good use of time, like a really strategic use of time that I never would have thought of myself. Let me give you some examples, because time is slippery, it's hard to grasp. I'm going to anchor us on the employee life cycle, right? This is my area of expertise. We're going to anchor there. We're going to talk about onboarding specifically, right? So anchor us. Onboarding, as you all know, you should stretch out people's onboarding experience. You should not cram everything up in the first week. You should use time strategically, ideally. 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Spread it out, right? What you do at the 30-day mark, the 60-day mark, depends on your organization, your industry, the team. I couldn't sit here and tell you, okay, everybody in this room, by 30 days, everybody must know X. Couldn't do that, right? There is, however, one space, one body of knowledge, one thing that every single person that you hire has to know within the first couple days, no matter who you are in this organization. You have to compress time for one thing, and that thing is you have to tell them everything you can about how you operate as their manager. They have to know that within the first couple days, maybe the week at the longest. The tool for this is called a user manual. When I came across it, I was like, oh, they're using time really strategically. Here's the idea. Everything in your office has a user manual. The printer, the computer, even the stapler on the box tells you how to put staples into it. Everything in the office has instructions except you. And you are the most complicated thing in that office, trust me. But no instruction on how to operate with you. Here's an example of what this looks like. There's a lot of ways to do this. This is what your new person needs to know about you. It'd be good for the person to know what you don't have patience for before they figure it out 30, 60, 90 days later. Tell them up front, right? Here's another version of it. This one's like 2 pages. Here's 1 page, maybe hard to read. They took it more literally. Do not push the following buttons. Here's what bothers them, right? Avoid personal injury. Like, they give harsh feedback. Hey, just don't take it personal. And then even very tactical things, when to meet with me, when I'm available, etc. A user manual. The thing is, people are going to figure this out about you anyway. They're just going to figure it out by pushing the wrong buttons, right? If they jam up the printer because they didn't read the instructions, the printer doesn't care. It has no emotions. You just tear that paper out, make sure IT didn't see you and got ink on it and throw it away, and the printer will work just fine. If they jam you up in the first 30, 60, 90 days, you will remember that. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've had like an email from some new person, and I'm like, why do they keep sending me like these long emails with all these paragraphs? Don't they know I like bulleted emails, short, to the point? No, they don't, because I never told them. Their previous manager liked long emails, so they're just doing that. It's my job to tell them that. See, what happens across 30, 60, 90 days if you don't give people instructions, if you let time stretch out, is something called the fundamental attribution error. It's a cognitive bias. It basically means when things go wrong, you blame the person, not the situation. And if the person is different than you, oh, you really blame the person because you know how they are. You don't blame the situation. You don't say, oh, I never told them this. So what this practice does is it shortens, it crams, it tightens up time, and it tells you here's what you deliver to that person right at the beginning. Really, really powerful practice that uses time strategically. Let's do another one. When you're at work and you're engaging with people, we all have meetings. As soon as we talk about meetings, I'm sure you're thinking about time, but not like in a good way. Like, man, too many damn meetings. This take too much time. I ain't got time for all these meetings. Time. There's too many people in these meetings. And by the way, when you say people, you're talking about time, because they're either wasting your time or they're wasting their time. But you're still talking about time, right? There's a lot of good resources out there about how to run effective meetings because time and meetings are just so intertwined. You can find all kinds of great stuff out there. So let me try to add some unique value for you. The way our meetings are set up, you are missing out on the brilliance of 30 to 50% of your team members. In this case, I'm not talking about race, I'm not talking about gender, I'm talking about introverts. Meetings don't work well for us, and I say us because I'm an introvert. People can't tell because of the work that I do, but I'm an introvert. We don't like brainstorming sessions, we don't like networking sessions, we don't like this kind of stuff where I'm sitting at the tables with people I don't know. We don't like that. It's because our brains work different. We use time differently. In meetings, extroverts have the ability, the gift, and I mean this, to process and talk at the same time. Process and talk in meetings. Oh yeah, here's an idea. Oh, you know what we can do? Oh yeah, hey, just ping-ponging back and forth. Process and talk. Sometimes what they say is brilliant, and sometimes what they say is horrible. But they're okay with that. That's the gift. Just process. And I'm over here, the introvert, wishing I could do that. Right? I'm like, I'm trying to jump in, figure out when do I get my... Oh, I was going to say that. That's what I was going to say. It's because introverts process, then talk. Process, then talk. And that space, that amount of time, sometimes it's just a minute or two, long enough for somebody else to say what I was going to say. Sometimes it's an hour. Sometimes I get my best idea at the end of the day, right? We process time differently. So a practice you want to do that you may be familiar with is to give agendas at the start. Right? Takes a little bit of time, but give everyone an agenda. That lets processors be ready for the meeting. Right? And by the way, I'm using the word introvert here liberally, right? But you could also think of it as the first person in your organization who's the first person of color, woman, older person, person with a disability, somebody who's a little bit less comfortable, introvert. All those folks in meetings are going to pause a bit, get the lay of the land. Like, all right, before I start talking, let me figure out what's going on here. I'm using introvert because it's easy to understand, but that same rule applies. Give agendas in the front end. Something that a lot of people don't do or are not familiar with is what you do at the end of a meeting. At the end of a meeting, tell everyone, and this is for like meetings of 8, 10 people at the most, say, hey, by the end of the day today or tomorrow morning, send me one more thought. Just send me one more thought. If you already gave me your best thought, cool, just send it again. And at the end of the day, send out an email to that invite and say, hey, folks, send me one more thought. I don't care if it's good or bad, just one more thought, because they won't believe that you really want it. Just send it out. What you're going to find when you get those emails back is sometimes the best idea came up in the meeting, but sometimes the best idea comes up at the end of the day when you gave them a chance to process and think. So you want to use time strategically. Let me use the last 3 minutes, 4 minutes here, to talk a little about AI. Because if you're not, well, this will transition into that. Like, this is the mistaken belief that leads to what we're dealing with there. Speed of thought equals accuracy of thought, right? So people think that speed equals accuracy. That's why we like the people that are in the meetings. Like, I like fast thinkers. I like quick learners, people fast on their feet, right? AI is really interesting. And if you don't quite see the connection between time and decision making, the smartest people, supposedly, are trying to figure out how to recreate our brains inside of machines, right? They cannot agree on anything, right? Will it destroy the environment or will it improve the environment? Will it create jobs or destroy jobs? More biased, less biased? All kinds of disagreement, right? It'll destroy humanity, that's a Terminator, right, or not. Cannot agree on anything. The one thing they agree on is it's faster. Everyone knows it's faster. Time. It makes decisions much, much, much faster than we do. There's two things to be aware of here, though, that help us understand what I'm talking about. One is called latency. Latency basically means response time, how fast it responds to you. So all these organizations want really, really fast response times, and that matters for things like cars, self-driving vehicles. You want that thing to respond really quickly, like milliseconds. It's life or death. I want that car to be able to respond really quickly. What's interesting, though, is it also matters for things like ChatGPT, right? Gemini, Perplexity, Claude, whatever you're using. They really want fast response times for this as well. And you may wonder, like, why? Why does that matter if I get an answer in milliseconds or 3 seconds or 10 seconds, right? Or even 3 minutes? You don't have to ask me. You can ask ChatGPT. You can say, hey, why does low latency, fast response time matter to you, ChatGPT? Like, literally ask it. It's going to give you some really interesting answers, like 4 or 5 bullets, right? One of those bullets is going to be this: perceived competence, right? Which goes back to that mistaken belief I said a moment ago. We actually believe speed of thought equals accuracy of thought. We like fast answers. So much so that if an answer is slow, even if it's a good answer, we don't trust it. And they need us to trust the decisions getting made by machines. So they have to give us really fast answers because that's built into how we are. By the way, I'm not anti-AI, I'm pro-AI. I'm just like pro-understanding, like how does this work? Because it's about to drive my life, right? So they're building that in, this idea of speed of thought. It's built in. At the same time, they're going in the other direction. There was a conference a couple months ago, at the end of last year, and an OpenAI researcher said, we have to teach AI how to do system 2 thinking, which is the slower thinking, right? That more deliberate reasoning. And then what he said next stunned the audience at that conference, which is full of people from AI. And this is the headline, right? Stuns is not my words. This is literally the headline. You can find it. It says OpenAI scientist stuns AI conference. The second half of that is what stunned them. He told them 20 seconds of thinking is worth more than 100,000 times data. Time, 20 seconds of thinking. Right? He couldn't believe this when he discovered it. He was like, wait, I just have to give AI more time and it actually comes out with a better decision? Yeah, time. The reason this is important is because they're running out of data to train the machines. Right? They're coming up with synthetic data. It's making mistakes because it doesn't have enough data. So they're trying to manipulate the other resource that we all have to make better decisions, which is time. So that brings us right back to what I said to you all earlier about diversity. Diversity is data. Diversity is data. It helps you make better decisions. Don't let any smoke screens ever convince you otherwise. People struggle with it because diversity is data in the shape of a human being. Like, it's old data. It's real data. People struggle with, how do I manage that type of data? But it's data. But underneath that is something also that's really powerful and ancient and been around forever, which is time. Those two things together, data and time. So as you're making decisions, right, you absolutely want to leverage data. You want to leverage diversity. You want to leverage technology. Leverage all those things at your fingertips. But don't lose sight of that valuable resource. I'd say it's more valuable than anything else, right? All of us want more time. Figure out how to use time. If you want better outcomes, think about time, spend more time thinking about time. All right, y'all. That's it. I appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.